Hello everyone. So I wanted to make a video about how I read like a professor and how you too can read like a professor. So when reading, you should always take notes. And one of the first things I do, and I can't help it, is I automatically look for the title. If the title is interesting, I'm going to highlight it and say, and let's see, I'm going to leave a note here. Interesting title. And of course, the first sentence just comes out right with it. We live in a very bordered world. Interesting. It is an argument. So, one of the first things I do is I just read the first paragraph or two. Usually, the introduction is just like in a regular essay. It kind of outlines everything that's going to be in this sort of rest of the book, right? So we live in a very bordered world. I wonder if this person's going to continue to talk about this. It's very interesting. One of the first things they do is they talk about the news. And that's another question I have. Why talk about news and communication? So I'm always looking for little things, that show up. And again, you can find out if something's academic, one, usually by the publishing company. The moment I saw that this was done by Oxford University Press, I know exactly that that's going to be a reputable source. Usually got two PhDs, maybe one PhD, but usually they're very high end, high class, and so I trust them. And a very short introduction. I know the series very well, so any kind of one of these very short introductions is always useful. And I also know by doing some research that this book, a very short introduction, this very bordered world, the reason why I knew about this is because I've been curious about border crossings or crossing borders, a Bedford Spotlight reader. And one of the first essays in the book is we live in a very bordered world. So I was wondering if I could find it somewhere, and then when I was able to, I'm like, all right, I want my students to read this. So they finally talk about borders, and notice that when I'm looking at this, one of the first things I highlight is not the fact that it's about borders. What kind of borders is this person talking about? Why these three? I'm sure there's more than three borders that these authors could have talked about. But why particularly political, cultural, economic? And remember, level three reading is about making connections. I realized in a different introduction called Engaging Borders, uh, they talk about politics, right? And another one from What Are Borders? It talks about national identity. So I'm like, man, this word political keeps showing up every time I look up something about borders from an academic source. There must be a reason why. So I can even write that in my notes here. Political is mentioned in other introductions on border studies. This must be something very important and central to border studies. So by giving myself that note, I now know this is something very important. This is like a theme. Now that I made that connection, now I know that there's somewhere I could go with this, right? So there's a lot that can be said about political borders. Borders are central features in current international disputes relating to security, migration, trade, and natural resources. I've seen this before in border crossings. I think it's called crossing borders, actually. And crossing borders, a special issue. So I'm just making a note to myself that I've seen these things before, right? So I'm starting to make connections. What is the connection between these two? I've seen these things multiple times. So there's something going on here. There must be a purpose. So when I'm reading, I'm not just looking for uh, bit by bit. I don't need to read that it's on the Earth's surface. They also factor prominently into local debate and don't really care about that. Regardless of the scale, it is clear that humans draw lines that divide the world into specific places, territories, and categories. I like this. There's a few things that stand out to me, and remember, this is the sort of re-quoting aspect I'm about to show you now. Humans draw lines. Create borders. So this is a sort of question answer that I'm kind of putting there, right? Humans drawing lines. Does that mean creating borders? I've seen this before. Are borders made or are they natural? Um, in another article, they talk about how borders are man-made, not actually existing in the physical world. So, for example, we can have a mountain that is a natural physical barrier, but when we're talking about walls, walls don't exist unless if someone builds them up. So, in this case, they're kind of suggesting here, uh, suggestion that borders are created by people. And that's important, right? Because what ends up happening is it divides the world. And I like that word divides because I think division is something very important to talk about when thinking about borders. You almost one can't help it, right? We often think about the division that people have between each other. That's like a border between each other, right? So that's very important in my mind. So I really want to make sure that I write down divides. Very important. And again, I noticed that he has a tendency to write three things, right? So he has places, territories, and categories. Physical, physical borders. And later on, in engaging borders and others, there's a distinction between a border and a boundary. The boundary being something that's invisible between people, and a border is a physical barrier between people. So the sort of difference between them. We are geographic beings. Now, here's something I know. The moment they put this in quotation marks, I know they didn't come up with this. So I'm going to put where or what source did they get this from? Remember, and you can write this down, all quotation marks show that this is not someone's original term. This is a specific term from a specific essay or book that they have read. Okay. Bordering seems natural, and the key word here is seems. Borders seem natural, but, and then here it goes, borders are not natural. Why put natural? And so you want to ask questions like this. Why put natural in quotation marks? Again, they got it from some kind of source. So he's making this sort of larger debate, right? He's making a sort of larger debate. And it's one that he's trying to make through various things that he has read. But borders are not natural phenomena. They exist only to the extent that humans regard them as meaningful. So I want to write that down. That's something I want to quote. I always look for things that I want to quote. I don't read just to read. I always look with an intention in mind to put things down that I can quote. Only to the extent that humans regard them as meaningful. This relates to the concept of a very bordered world. Okay, so I'm making a connection here, right? I'm letting myself know and I'm letting this reader know that only to the extent that humans regard them as meaningful, I'm going to put something that I know about, which is the power of ideology appears everywhere in all border essays. So, this is a sort of larger connection, right? A level 3 reading thing is that I'm making a connection between all the essays that I've read. And I'm not going to read about a very short introduction to proceeds, presents borders of blah, 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 blah. But here's what I want to look at reveals their socially constructed quality and by consequence our capacity to use them, change them, or even abolish them. And again, there's that sort of three list things, right? Use, change, abolish. And you will see this term a lot. Socially constructed is used by several authors. So it's a good thing to make connections, right? Because there's a reason why all three of them are using this term. And I might as well explain it now. There are things that are man made, and there are things that are just natural, right? So, for example, people believe that someone could be a product of their social environment. So, if they grow up with privilege, they will always exist with privilege. However, it could also be something that is socially constructed, right? This is something that happens over a longer period of time, and it's basically created by people in society, and yet, and here's the big thing, people may not notice the construction. They're building something, but they don't even realize that they're building privilege, let's say. For them, they think it's natural, right? They think it's natural. But socially constructed means that it wasn't just naturally like that, it was something that happened over a longer period of time, and it was created by people in society to benefit a certain group of people, right? So that's what we mean by a social construction is that society has created something and usually we don't even notice it. So we explore the theoretical, so they're going to explore theories of borders, and empirical. Now I'm going to put down word for me here, just for myself and for you. Empirical means known evidence. So personal experience, right? It's another way of saying sort of personal experience. It's something that you experience. Empirical complexity of borders and bordering processes while revealing the broad effects these phenomena have in our daily lives. uh, I love this word phenomenon. And they've used it more than once. So what does phenomenon mean? I'm just going to put it down here. This, by the way, it really helps if you want to learn how to spell something. It really helps just to write a word down. You kind of get used to it afterwards. Everyday or ordinary thing. So, or occurrence, I should say. It's just an everyday occurrence, right? This phenomenon is an everyday occurrence, and but it's much bigger than it appears to be. And I'm going to put here, because he mentions daily lives, I'm going to use the word ubiquitous, if I can only spell it. Can I spell it? Nope, I still can't spell. Ubiquitous means everywhere. So borders, meaning borders are everywhere. I'm making this clear to myself. I always write things down, even if I know them already. I have them in my head. I have messed up so many times that I forget what I'm trying to say. So this is very important, right? You want to write these things down. Truth be told, most people cross hundreds of geographic borders on a daily basis. So what? Some are formal borders. What does that mean? I'm very curious. This is something I'm not really sure what they mean. What does this person mean? demarcating or showing. I'm going to put the word showing here. So that way, when I read the sentence again, I'm going to put showing. So, for example, some are formal borders showing ownership or the limits of government authority. Oh, boy, don't tell that to anyone. Governmental authority. Who has control? Big question. While others are symbolic or informal associations of places with social groups or ideas. Hmm. The first thing that I thought of when I did that is I think of the U.S.-Mexico border. The U.S.-Mexico border has this sort of feeling of a symbol, right? It's a symbol of here's your country, here's my country, we're different, and yet we are connected in some sort of way. So this is a sort of informal association that is symbolic, but people don't even recognize it as symbolic, right? They just think borders and the border wall are not symbolic. They are supposed to be what they already mean. In other words, people attach meaning and assume that the border itself has a meaning and will always have a meaning, when the answer is no. It's the person or social group or ideas that form the sort of symbolic or informal association. So this is just page one, right? As you can see, I go into a lot of detail, and I'm always asking myself a couple of questions. I'm always asking myself, one, what is this author's thesis? What are they trying to say? What are they trying to argue? Number two, what are there some forms of evidence? Where are they getting their sources from? Number three, what are their sort of arguments? And where can I quote from this? And what can I say about these quotes? Can I write a minimum of, let's say, 3 sentences after a quote that reveals something about this quote and why I found it important? Number four, I always look for words that are difficult to read, comprehend, or understand, and I want to rephrase them in a way where I could say the sentence again in my own words, which makes it easier to read. And number five, the most one of the most important is that I try to think about things that I'm unfamiliar with and then ask questions. Asking questions is the most essential thing anyone can do. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to look at the English 101 syllabus, and I want you to look at the Essay 1 prompts. And what I want you to do is I want you to ask at least 3 essential questions that you think you can answer. This is sort of an exercise for you. So what are 3 questions you have about the syllabus and about the Essay 1 prompts? You can send these to me in my inbox. You're not going to be graded on this, but if you want to do it, feel free to do it. And I can guarantee you it will help you get much more in sync with what it is that you're trying to do. Okay, thank you so much.